Welcome everyone. We're doing teriyaki stir-fry tonight. I really like this recipe, similar to our salad last week. It's just really something that's very customizable, and you can use a lot of vegetables that you already have in your pantry on hand. Another thing that I like about this recipe is all of these vegetables are very shelf stable. So I was thrilled to hear a lot of you saying that broccoli or cabbage are some of your favorites. Brussels sprouts are just little baby cabbages. These are all in the cruciferous brassica family. Kales are in there as well, and these are just really hearty greens that will keep their shelf life for a while. So these are some of my favorites to just have on hand to chop up. All of these ingredients can be eaten raw, sliced up really thin, made into kind of a slaw, or we can pan fry them. So if things get hotter, depending on where you are, that's also a really nice option to make this kind of a raw salad. I did this, I cut up some different types of cabbage and some carrots, and then just poured teriyaki sauce and then used that as kind of like an Asian slaw base. So if you're trying to go no heat, that is also an option in this recipe, though I like cooking it because we just start to caramelize some of the flavors a little better. So one of our ingredients is broccoli. Again, a really nice hearty vegetable, lots of fiber in it. Depending on how long your stalks are, you can actually chop your stalks up, but I want to be mindful that you are cutting off kind of this outer layer. I'm not sure if you can see the ring, but that's the really tough part. So sometimes if you don't take that off, you'll just be chewing a lot longer, and it's not as fun of a mouthfeel. So that's an option for you. Broccoli stems are one of my favorite things to eat, and that's often a part of the broccoli that people just cut off and discard. So that's completely edible. I like to cook with it, and it's similar to like watercress. And again, if you have any questions, just unmute yourself and shout them out. Next up is our carrots. This is giving us a pop of color. Again, a really nice vegetable to have on hand. These are what we call aromatics. Along with our onions, this is going to give us our kind of base flavor that we build off of. If you're familiar with French cooking at all, they have a term that's mirepoix, and that is carrots, onion, and celery, and that's considered their base flavor for everything, and then they build on top of that. So those kind of vegetables really balance each other out. Celery is also naturally occurring in salt, so I think that's part of the reason that people really started to flock with that. If you're in Puerto Rico or more in the Caribbean, you would be using red peppers and cilantro and onions kind of cut up together into a sofrito-like thing. So just knowing what kind of base ingredients you like to create flavor, and then starting to swap those out, or seeing what different cultures their base flavors are, can really start to pivot the recipe. Next up, we have our cabbage. Again, we talk about different parts of the body needing different foods, and I always say that anything that's shaped like a brain is good for your brain. So this is our cabbage. We're gonna cut out this middle stalk here. This is really hard to chew again. And I like to use about half a cabbage or a quarter cabbage, because whenever you cut up cabbage, without fail, it will be more than you want. So the name of this game is not to overcrowd our pans too much. If you have a wok, that's another great option to cook into. We've gone through carrots. Again, we're gonna have our onion. That's a nice base flavor. We'll start cooking that up first. We have some garlic, which is going into our stir fry. This can also be chopped up and added to our sauce, depending on whether you want to infuse a little more sauce into your simmer. Some sriracha, for those of you who like heat. That's always a tasty add-on. And then I also have sesame seeds, just because those are two things I like to put on my bowls. Salt and pepper, traditional, nice spices. I do want to say this salt right here is pink Himalayan salt. What do different colors of salt just have different flavors? So really tasting the salt that you're cooking with, and maybe starting to branch out and experiment. Salt, when tasted, should taste good. When I eat iodine salt, like, I don't really like the taste of it. So with people who need iodine in their diets, that could be a good alternative, but some salts will taste different than others. So knowing what kind of salts you have are really helpful for creating different flavors. And if you're interested, I got gifted a salt set. So next week I can show you kind of some of the different ones. I have a black like lava salt, which is so salty and bitter that I can use like maybe 1 grain in a dish. So I would say if you're ever at a market, pink Himalayan salt is definitely become more popular. People believe that the different colors have different trace minerals in them. So having a sea salt, having more of a rock salt, those are good ways to get those trace minerals. Next up, we have our oil. The recipe calls for olive oil, which is totally fine for sauteing, though I would say keep it at a medium to medium high heat because it does tend to burn. It has a lower smoke point, but depending on how processed it is, filtered, that may or may not be more of an issue. I also have an avocado oil that I'm using today. This is a higher smoke point oil, along with sunflower, grapeseed, those sorts of oils, and those are really great for higher temperatures and when we're really trying to do a high heat saute. I really like to use olive oil for lower cooking or just salad dressings. And then we have a little brown sugar. This is going to get added to our
What happens if
sauce.
you have like sesame oil?
Sesame oil's delicious. Are you planning to cook entirely in sesame oil?
Well, I have like both like olive oil and sesame oil.
So I would say start with olive oil to saute our vegetables, and then when we add our soy sauce, you'll drizzle some sesame oil in. You can absolutely cook with sesame oil, but again, sesame tends to be a bit more sensitive to heat, so you have to keep your heat pretty medium to low just to make sure that you're not going to burn your oil. But some people say that they cook with sesame oil all the time, so it's just knowing your type of oil. But as a general scale of smoke point, avocados, sunflower, canola oil, the more refined fruity oils tend to be higher, and then our olive oil, our sesame oil, walnut oil, those tend to be more mid to low range of being able to handle heat. Same with butter. If you ever brown butter, you know that that's slowly burning off some of the fats and caramelizing it, which is very tasty. But maybe if you're doing a 20-minute fry on something, butter will be too low of a smoke point and start to burn, and then that you just have that burnt taste. But I have some sesame oil as well, and I love to drizzle that on as a finish or at the end where you're kind of starting to add some flavor. Garlic is another one that people often use and throw in at the first step of your saute, and I like to put garlic similar to sesame's as one of our last ingredients that we add, just because it is a more delicate flavor and it can burn. So sometimes if you've ever roasted something and it looks amazing, but all the garlic on top is burnt, that's okay, but that's kind of what happens with garlic and high heat. So just being mindful of that. All right, we're gonna get into the knife skills. Again, a reminder, everyone, even though you're cutting and cooking in your house, just wash your hands to keep yourself and your family members safe. There's a lot of pathogens in the kitchen, and we're just gonna wash all sides of our hands, up and down, under our nails, for about 30 seconds, which is 2 happy birthdays. So if you haven't already done that, it's always a good reminder. And so I'm gonna go through and chop all the vegetables, but I wanna say in terms of our process, we're probably gonna start with our onions. I like to caramelize those, and then our carrots, again with those aromatic smells. Those start a nice flavor, and then we can add our others in. Again, reminding our knives, we're pinching on the hilt and we're wrapping our 3 fingers under. This gives us a lot more control over our knife and pressure. And again, you'll start to see that the knife is actually designed for your fingers to wrap around. It kind of bulges out there. So if that's what your knife's got going on, we're gonna do that, our nice pinching, and then we're keeping our claw method. And so for onions, what I really like to do, because onions can often be one of your most dangerous ingredients in the kitchen, because when you cry, when you cut them, you often cry. And that is just an essential oil in the onion that is activated with oxygen. So that's kind of why you don't cry if you were just holding an onion, but when you start to chop and start to break those cell walls and get those oxygen and juices flooding, then you start to have the tears, which can really affect your visibility on chopping. So I like to keep the bottom of my onion on and cut through the root ball, and this keeps my onion together. And so this way I'm not kind of trying to keep it all together because the root is holding it. So right now I'm taking my claw, I'm keeping my fingers tucked in so I'm not hurting anything. And if you can see, I'm cutting all the way to, but not through the root. And that allows my onion to kind of stay together and not split everywhere. And it also reduces the tears because there's not as much oxygen getting to those cuts. So I'm doing nice slices. I'm keeping my fingers nice and tucked in. And I personally, at this point, like to cut one more time. So it's just a little easier to bite the onions. And then I will take my claw and I will just chop off my root. For those of you who are doing your stock bags, all of this onion skins and scraps and roots are great things to throw in a gallon Ziploc bag in the freezer. And then once that's full, put it in a pot, fill it with water, boil it for 30 to an hour, and you have a really nice veggie stock. If anyone's cooking with proteins like chicken with bones, those are also great additions to your stocks. Any sort of wing bones or necks or rib cages. I will sometimes get a roast chicken, and then when I'm done, I just take the carcass and my scrap bag and make one more stock so I can really get as many uses out of my chicken as possible. Is anyone cooking with different types of protein right now?
I'm using tofu.
Excellent, tasty.
Yes.
I was hoping to use tofu, but they were out at the store, so we're keeping it all veggie. Tofu is a great option for stir fries, and chicken as well, any sort of sausage. This was really good with an egg on top. Proteins, I think, are often the darling of the nutrition world, just because that's what everyone is most concerned about. But when you look at how much protein you actually need in a day versus how much we consume, chances are we get enough protein that you can have a completely veggie full meal and not miss anything. There's also trace protein in all of our vegetables as well.
Nice.
Hey Mallory, I think Sergio was asking what he would do with the chicken.
Yeah, so for those who are cooking with proteins, we're gonna chop up all of our veggies, have that off to the side. Then I like to use chicken in particular, using something plastic to cut on because chicken juices can often carry salmonella. So I like to cut up my chicken after everything so I don't worry about any cross-contamination on my cutting board. If we started with chicken and chopped it up, then we would have issues with maybe salmonella getting on, or chicken juice getting on our onions or getting on our knives. So I would chop up your chicken at the end, and then we're going to cook that first along with our tofu. So we're gonna get our pan really nice and hot and then throw our chicken pieces or our tofu in with a little bit of oil, and we want it to brown on one side. And then everyone else who doesn't have proteins will come join the second step where we start adding vegetables in and doing the stir fry. Sergio, what type of chicken are you cooking with? Do you have chicken breasts or thighs? Breast. Okay, yeah, that's perfect. So chicken breasts are wonderful because you don't have to worry about bones. Those will sometimes change the cook temperature. Breasts, again, you just want to chop it up so they're all about the same piece size. Keeping things the same size, and usually I like to do it on the smaller end. One, it's easier to take a bite and have all of those different flavors incorporated, but you also don't worry as much about cook time. So if you're chopping up your chicken into nice bite-sized pieces, those will be ready and cooked by the end of the meal. Where if you have like a chicken breast that you throw in, that could take quite a long time to get cooked all the way through. So I've done my onions now. Next is onto our carrots. I'm just going to chop off the end. One thing about carrots that I'd like to talk about is organics. So for some folks, shopping organic is very important. Organic is an actual measurable standard, unlike natural. Natural is just a greenwashing term used to sell food, which I always find very bizarre that people use the word natural to like describe vegetables. It's like, how would it not be natural? Or should we then say everything else is unnatural food, like our blue Oreos or something? But anyways, that is a tangent. One thing I like about organics, though they tend to be more expensive, is that there's less chemicals used in that process. And that is particularly important with root vegetables. I would say root vegetables, kale, we can send out an information that's the so-called dirty dozen. Those tend to be berries, kale, spinach, things that bugs already like to eat is usually why they spray chemicals. So if you know that it's tasty, then chances are some other sort of animal also thinks it's tasty. So buying these things organic when possible is really great, because then I don't worry about peeling my carrot, in response to Julia's question. So for those of you who are more concerned about chemicals, then taking your knife or a peeler and just going really lightly down your carrot will also take off the skin. This makes the carrot a little easier to cook because, again, we're taking out this tough outer layer. And if these were non-organic carrots, I would definitely peel them because this is touching the soil. So this would be our most contaminated part of our carrot, similar to kind of peeling a potato as opposed to keeping it. So that's totally a personal preference. And feel free to take your skins off if you don't like things really chewy. I leave them on because, again, skins are fiber and have different nutrients in them than sometimes other parts of our vegetables. So I always try to keep the skins on if they're not, the texture isn't going to affect the dish too much. And that is where, when we get to our broccoli, I will take those off because it is so chewy that sometimes it's just not enjoyable. So with my carrots, there's two ways to safely cut a carrot. Again, we're keeping our nice pinch. We can either cut off an edge so it has a flat side and it doesn't roll, or what I like to do is find any notches or use kind of the end of my knife and really notch in the edge and then start to slice down with my hand. This creates kind of these half moons, and we don't have any rolling or concerns chopping these. So again, when in doubt, create a flat edge, and then you won't have any sort of slippage or any knife issues chasing your carrot around your cutting board. And Nathan brought up a good point, and we'll try to do our best here, but especially when cooking chicken and proteins, it's important not to crowd your pan. And leaving enough airspace allows for that heat to really envelop our ingredients, where if we pack this full, like a frittata or something, then our ingredients start to steam. So if you're looking for that caramelization, we want to keep our pan somewhat open and able to kind of move ingredients around. So if you find yourself kind of creating a thick layer, maybe you want to cook in batches. For those of you who have the saute pan, I'll be very curious to hear how it goes, because I specifically bought that pan for this recipe. Those are really great. Saute pans are different than frying pans in that they have higher walls. So you can have more things kind of hanging out on the side than in a normal frying pan where you're maybe starting to overcrowd. I'm currently cooking with a cast iron skillet because I like the way it retains heat, and that's just what I have at home. And cast irons are great because this could be 200 years old, and we just put oil on it and make sure that it keeps its finish, and it will keep going. So I really enjoy cast iron. I don't have to worry about its finish coming off or it ever needing to get replaced. Those are a great thing when we have thrift stores again, to keep an eye out on thrift stores, because sometimes you'll see really beat up ones and they just need a little love to get back into it. So again, with our cabbage, our brain, we're gonna cut off this edge right here. So I'm just holding on and I'm just kind of doing a stabbing and jabbing motion. And this again just gets rid of our tough stalk. We'll be doing a similar process with our broccoli, just keeping everything a similar texture. And then I like to cut these into quarters. This will often be your chance to see if you have too much cabbage going on, because it starts to multiply quickly at this point. Again, I'm keeping my fingers tucked in. Cabbage is a little hard, tends to separate easily, and I like to just give it a nice dice. Everything is well incorporated, so it's easy to eat when we are creating our sauté. Something I'm doing right now that you might be interested in is I'm just putting all my cut up items in a baking dish. So it's all in one place, and then I can kind of grab as needed, and I don't have to worry about things falling off. So that's often nice to use some of your bakeware in your cooking just to keep things organized. And I'm gonna chop up more of my cabbage. How's everyone doing? Do we have any questions? No, perfect.
I think I may have just, I don't know. I don't know if one onion is too much, but I feel like I have like so much onion.
Well, and that's great. And then just keep an eye out on it. I would say you need about half an onion if you're making a 1 to 2 to 3 serving. But that's the beauty of these recipes, is you can really scale up and scale down as much as you want. And that's a good idea. Again, I try to do that with my cabbage as well, as I prep everything and then maybe I won't add everything, especially depending on how much space you have in your pan. So then you have veggies prepped and ready to go for your next cooking adventure, because all of these will stay really nicely in the fridge in just a Tupperware. But again, look at how much cabbage just a half of that turned out to be. So yeah, I would say absolutely, if you have more onion than you think you want, you're the one who's going to be eating it. So feel free to scale up or scale down as needed. So our last ingredient that we're going to prep at this moment is our broccoli. These are all called, this is called the broccoli head, and then these are florets. If you're concerned about your knife skills, you can always snap off the florets. And I like to take my knife and kind of go right about the middle of our florets. So I have a clear stalk piece and kind of a clear florets. These are about bite size. So again, just thinking about what size is comfortable for you to eat. And if things are too big, you can always take another bite. And I'd like to just snap off these stems, and then those add some texture. So for our stalk, again, we're gonna find a nice flat surface. I've cut this off, and then I'm just gonna take my knife while holding it and just go around very gently and cut off all of that kind of tough exterior skin. If anyone's curious why we're cutting this off, take a bite. I can barely bite all the way through. So it's totally edible. It's not necessary to cut off skins. Often there's more fiber and nutrients in the skin than in the center. But if you're having dinner and you maybe have to chew 40 times to get something down, maybe that's something that you want to cut off for the next time. That is also a factor in mindful eating, is making sure that you chew and masticate as much as possible. So maybe you're trying to be more mindful about your eating and you want to have very fibrous foods that require a lot of chewing. My bio people might be able to tell more, but I was reading that the simple act of chewing in the saliva starts your digestive process. So before food even gets to your stomach, the act of chewing our food starts that process and gets your stomach's juices ready for the food that's coming. So I think that's pretty cool to think about, that we're already starting to eat before we even get food into our bellies. And again, if you have some heads that are too large, just kind of cut them in half down to bite-sized pieces. I now have my naked stalk. Again, this is a really nice texture, and I'm just going to cut this into matchsticks. So keeping my fingers nice and tucked, I'm cutting it into about 3 pieces, and then going through, cutting it again, and maybe bite size. So this is what we call matchsticks, which is cutting it into different pieces of uniform size, ideally. Keeping everything, regardless of what you're cooking, about the same size is just going to really make sure that everything is cooking at the same temperature and speed. Where if we had a giant piece of broccoli and a bunch of little pieces of broccoli, by the end, maybe those little pieces would be burnt and the large pieces would still be tough on the inside. So our last thing we're going to do is take the back of our knife in our palm and press down on our garlic cloves. This splits the skin and allows us to peel the garlic easier. They also have things you can buy that are like little silicone tubes that you put garlic in that apparently takes the skin off of. People really hate garlic skins, so I think you can find all sorts of equipment or just minced, pre-made, processed garlics to avoid this spot. But I don't mind it too much. If you are bothered by the smell of garlic and onions on your hands after cooking, finding something that's stainless steel, I think your saute pan should work, and rubbing it on your hands, the stainless steel will actually pick up those smells. Same with a stainless steel cooktop. That's kind of fun. And again, when they have a product for everything, they also sell stainless steel soap for precisely that reason. It's just a bar of soap that's like a big metal bar of soap that you're supposed to rub on your hands to get rid of any spicy smells. So if that bothers you, you might want to look into it. I think it's pretty silly, but whatever makes cooking more enjoyable. So we're going to take our garlic and we're going to smash, just in case it's not smashed enough. Again, garlic and onions do really well if left to kind of sit out in the air for a little bit. They're easier to digest once they've reached oxygen. So we're just going to chop our garlic into fine little strips. Again, I'm keeping my fingers nice and tucked for this work. And then I'm going to kind of form it into a pile, taking my fingers and going back and forth. And this is called mincing. And mincing just means you're getting really small little cuts. Ideally, everything's less than 1/8 of an inch. If you have a garlic press, this would be another great time, or a little mini food processor. Just whir this up. We want this to be nice and small to incorporate our garlic flavor. And I personally am going to just mix this into my soy sauce to kind of give a little extra oomph to our teriyaki sauce. You can also just throw this into your stir fry and not include it in your sauce. It really doesn't matter.
What are you throwing into your soy sauce?
I'm going to put this garlic in just to infuse my soy sauce with a little bit of garlic smell. This is absolutely not necessary, but I just like to do it. So I'm putting my 2 cloves into my soy sauce for a more flavorful teriyaki sauce. Now, if you kept your garlic and just sauteed it, that would be the same delivery method. I just like to create more of a simmer sauce. That is what teriyaki literally means, is just a sauce that you simmer meat or vegetables in. And so I have a little jar. For those of you who were with me last week, I love little jars for my sauces. They're super easy to just dump all the ingredients in and then get back to it when you want. A little bowl or a cup is also great. I have my brown sugar. And so if people want, you can put the brown sugar into your soy sauce and garlic, and this creates a teriyaki. The recipe also says to use soy sauce to simmer and then sprinkle brown sugar at the end as a finish. That all depends on how sweet you like your teriyaki. If you add brown sugar at the end, you'll get more sugar tastes while you're eating it, where if you put it in your sauce, it tends to mellow out a little bit and create a more bodied sauce. So I'm gonna just add mine in to my sauce. And we're just gonna add this at the very end so we don't have to worry about our sugars burning at all. We're using, oh yes.
Sorry, you can just add raw garlic to a sauce.
So kusei with the sauce we made last week, which was just olive oil and like some sort of vinegar, acid, citrus. I often like to make a lazy, what I call a lazy Caesar salad, which is just 1 part olive oil, 1 part lemon juice, and then garlic chopped up super fine. And I pour that over all sorts of salad dressings. I'll add Parmesan cheese if I'm trying to go more in the Caesar dressing. But I would say chopping up garlic and putting it into some sort of oil with a little bit of vinegar or some tanginess. We don't have to worry too much because soy sauce is a very strong flavor. That's a great base or salad dressing for a lot of different things. So I'd say start trying to infuse different oils with garlic and see if you like that.
What else did you add besides garlic to the soy sauce?
I added some brown sugar. If folks have dried ginger or fresh ginger, that's also another great thing to add into soy sauce. And that if you're at the store buying a jar of teriyaki sauce and looking at the back ingredients, hold on, I actually have it.
Do you ever use ginger?
Do it.
Do you ever use ginger?
How much garlic should we add to the teriyaki sauce?
It's really good. It's a weird combination of ginger and more, and he's really good.
Yeah, that doesn't sound weird.
So here is a jar of teriyaki. And one reason I like to make my own is one, it's usually much more affordable. And again, when we look at our nutrition ingredients, this says a serving is 1 tablespoon. It has 25 calories and then goes through different sugars, cholesterol, sodium, carbohydrates. But when we look at the ingredients, the first ingredient is water. So I bought this for, I think, about $6. But knowing that the first ingredient's water and then the second ingredient's sugar, it's just like you're already buying so much filler with a lot of these different sauces. And same with salad dressings as a whole tend to have those ingredients that stretch them. So making it yourself, you are able to control kind of the taste. But for our other ingredients, it's soy sauce is our third, vinegar, salt, cornstarch to give it some thickness, garlic, ginger, sesame seed, caramel color, xanthan gum, again to keep some thickness, cultured maltodextrin and cultured dextrose, that's another word for sugar, so again more sugar, and some caramel coloring. So knowing that we're just adding brown sugar and garlic into our soy sauce, we're creating a much more pure and refined version rather than something that has a lot of different additives in it. So I often find if I'm at the store and I want a certain salad dressing, rather than spending the like $6 on it, I just look at the back ingredients and be like, oh, okay, like I have soy sauce, garlic, ginger, sesame seeds. That is your main ingredients for a teriyaki sauce. I didn't include garlic as a necessity because those often are harder to keep on hand, but having dried garlic or those frozen blister packs, of ginger is harder to keep on hand, not as often used or a staple in households. So having dried ginger powder or ginger root, you can buy dried, or just the blister packs, or omitting it. So we're omitting it. If you have ginger and want to add it, it's always tasty. It adds another sweetness to it. So does anyone have questions about ingredients? I've chopped everything up. How are my protein people doing?
Can I ask that? Can
Good.
you also add like red pepper flakes to that as well?
Absolutely. For those who like it spicy, that's a great thing to add in. You can either add it to your jar of sauce or just on top at the end. I love cooking with chili flakes. And I have some sriracha for my heat that I'll drizzle over the end, but chili flakes is always good. All right, I'm going to pop over. Feel free to look at whatever screen you would like. I am going to set up my above camera.
Wait, I'm sorry. How do you do? What's the best way to do the ginger?
The ginger is actually cool in that the skin is so thin that you can use the back of a spoon to scrape off the skin of the ginger. And then I like to use either my knife and mince it very finely, or if you have a box grater, the smallest hole of a box grater is a really great way to shred it. Also a citrus, mandolin's not the right word. Somebody help me out.
Would you put it in the soy sauce or?
Yeah, I would put it in the soy sauce mixture that we're making.
Okay.
That's a more traditional teriyaki. And again, if we're using fresh ginger, we're going to use a little bit more. If we're using dried ginger, the water has been removed and you have more ginger taste, so you can use less of the dried. I've added about 2 tablespoons of oil to my pan. You just kind of want to get the bottom nice and coated. And now I'm going to put in half an onion. And for those of you who are worried about crowding your pan, it's always good to start with kind of half the ingredients and then see if you want to add some more. So I've used my onions, and now I'm going to add a little bit of salt. And I use a little pinch pot because you really just don't need too much salt, just a pinch. The salt starts to pull some of that water out of your onion, and that's going to get you a nice caramelized taste. For those of you who are cooking proteins, you're going to want to put your proteins in and let them cook on one side until they're browned, and then add your onions. And next, I like to add my carrots because that's going to create those aromatic. Carrots have a lot of sugar in them.
Are you adding that to where your rice is?
This is just a pan in and of itself, and if I had rice, I'd be cooking rice on the side. The rice will just be used as a base to put all your veggies on top of.
So you have rice in there now?
I don't have any rice.
Okay, sorry. Okay.
So I'm just going to give that a stir. I'm starting to see some caramelization already happening on my onions, which is great. We want that nice brown char because that means that we're getting some sugars out of it. So I'm just going to give this 1 or 2 more minutes, and then I'm going to add my cabbage and my broccoli. I like to add my broccoli next because you want to kind of create, when doing a stir fry, you want the flavor to go in, and then you want your heartiest vegetables to go in because those are going to have a little bit longer of a cook time.
Sorry for that.
How's everyone doing?
Did you say you put in your onions first, or?
I put my onions in first because I like to caramelize them and let them get a little tender.
I'm popping its cherry right now.
Oh my god, that's
If you put your onions in last, they're less sweet and they have more of a crunchy, spicier taste. So again, it's preference. A lot of stir fries will kind of have an onion medium cook, so it's still a little crunchy. So it provides that texture to it.
Did you add the cabbage in already?
I haven't added my cabbage in. I like to let my cabbage go last, though you can dump everything in together. This is also great prep if we took that kind of this entire container and dumped it into a bag, that would be something that you could just pull out when you're back ready for dinner and just throw into a frying pan. I like to put my cabbage in last because that won't take as long to cook.
Wait, did you already put in your tofu?
Or your tofu, I would cook it separately if you like it browned. You would do it kind of at the beginning as if you do chicken, or you can add your tofu in now.
And if I have mushrooms, when do I put those in?
Mushrooms I like to leave to the end. So once we add our sauce in, then you put mushrooms because mushrooms don't take too long to sweat. But again, if you like your mushrooms really cooked down, then I'd say now is a great time. You're always thinking about what texture you want your food to be and what their cook time is. So if something has a lot of liquid, like mushrooms or cabbage, that will take a lot less time to cook because so much of that weight and structure is just water that will cook out. Where onions and our broccoli are a little tougher, so they require a little more cook time. And when I know I want to add my cabbage is when my broccoli starts looking very vibrant green. This usually takes a couple minutes. Another thing about stir fry is if you're somebody who really likes those crispy edges, you want to leave your pan alone. The longer your food has contact with the bottom of the pan, the more caramelization and more sugars and flavors develop. If you care more about keeping a nice crunchy texture, you're gonna wanna stir your stir fry often to keep things moving around and give different sides a chance to interact with your hot pan. So again, it's all your preference. I like to do a little bit of both where I'll stir because stirring is fun. And then I use the back of my spatula to kind of just press things down into the pan to really increase that hot contact. And so now I will be adding my cabbage. And for more delicate things, like if people were throwing kale in or other types of greens, sometimes I just like to let them sit on top of all my vegetables. And so the steam will start to steam them and they're not competing with some of that nice crispy heat on the bottom of our pan for our coloring. And again, for those of you who are looking at this top view, this is probably the most you want in your pan. You can absolutely add more, but then you're gonna have to spend all your time making sure none of it escapes. So I'm giving it a nice little stir. If you didn't add and make kind of a prepared sauce, now would be the time to put your garlic and your soy sauce in. And since I put that all together in my nice little jar, I'm just gonna give it a little shake and then drizzle it on and reduce my heat to medium. This is just to make sure that we're not burning anything. And then with the sauce added, I'm gonna let that cook until it's reduced, maybe about 3 minutes. And again, I'm using my nose to let me know when is a good time to pull it off. So when things start to smell really incorporated and my stomach starts to be like, ooh, that smells really good, I'm ready to eat, that's usually a time to check it. Again, this is a quick and fast cook time. So we're really just looking for texture of ingredients. Depending on the type of soy sauce, if you have regular soy sauce or sodium reduced, you might want to add a little more salt at this point, or just leave it as is. The soy sauce has a very salty, distinct taste, so that really lends a lot of flavor. And I would say mine is done. It's looking really nice and soft. Oftentimes, if I'm worried about burning things, I will turn off the heat and then I'll just let it hang out for a couple minutes. So that still keeps the steam. It's still hot, but it's a really nice passive way to cook and finish the rest of your food without having high heat and then immediately having to turn it off and worrying about burning it. For people with tofu and chicken, how is that going?
Oh no, okay.
Good.
Oh
Cool.
wait, I had a question, but I forgot. Oh yeah, when did you add your soy sauce again?
I added my soy sauce after I put my cabbage on, kind of as my last ingredient, because that liquid's gonna cause all of your ingredients to steam, and then that kind of pulls all the flavors together at the end. Where if we added the soy sauce at the beginning, all of our sauce would have cooked off and we would be having to make sure nothing was burning with the 5-10 minutes it takes to cook all of the rest of our vegetables down. And for those of you who are interested, while I grabbed my teriyaki sauce, I also got my stainless steel bar of soap. So these exist. This was given as a gag gift, but I guess also works. Let me see. But it just feels really ridiculous to have a metal bar of soap next to my sink. But for people who hate garlicky hands, this might be a perfect thing for you. And definitely works. They smell less garlicky. So now, while things are kind of melding together, I have a nice consistency on my sauce. Again, if we were doing a teriyaki meat where we were doing more of a marinade, we would make this sauce and then put our tofu or our chicken into it, and you can prep that the night before, a couple hours before, and that just infuses more protein flavor. So that's another option. Or if you were maybe doing a barbecue and wanted to do a teriyaki, you do your teriyaki sauce, then marinate whatever and have more sauce left over. And then if you have a cornstarch or a thickener, that might be a chance to add a little bit of starch to give it that nice kind of thick sauce that we talk about. So it's totally up to you. Our sauce right now is just acting as a base and a way to finish cooking all of our vegetables. And then for my final ingredients, I'm gonna add some sesame seeds on top. Drizzling some sesame oil right now would be delicious if you haven't already done so and are planning to. I love adding seeds to dishes just because it gives an extra texture and flavor on top. So if I can ever do walnuts or almonds or pepitas or sesame seeds, again, we want our food to look pretty, and when we use a bunch of different ingredients and colors, chances are it will look prettier. I'm going to grab and here is our final ingredient. Again, crack a couple eggs on top. This is also does really well the next day. You have a coleslaw to use as a base. Making this into a fried rice for breakfast tomorrow. If you have any leftover rice, crack a couple eggs, throw it back in a pan. That's really tasty. For our salad last week, I had some left over and I just put it in a tortilla with cheese and made a really delicious quesadilla. So if you have more than you're going to eat, thinking about ways that you like to reuse some of your leftovers, whether it's reincorporating it into a different type of fry or putting it in something, those are all ways to get the most bang for your meal if you don't want to cook every single meal. This is also another great thing to add into a jar, and then you have a nice easy salad to eat whenever is convenient. So you can put leftovers into packages and just eat it like a salad. Any questions? How are things looking? How are things tasting? How are things smelling?
Looks amazing.
Awesome. For those of you who are done, please start eating. And for those of you who are finishing up, keep on stirring.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Do I put the rice in separately later, like once I like put it on my plate?
Absolutely. And again, that is totally a preference. Right now, if you want to make more of a fried rice, you can throw some rice in now. I personally love having like the archaeological layers of a meal. So if I have some of my teriyaki and then put it on a bed of rice, the rice really absorbs all of the sauce and flavor, but it can totally be incorporated. It is your preference. And being a recovering picky eater, where as a child white rice was my literal favorite food, I still really enjoy getting just like regular bites of rice, completely unadulterated. Any other questions? Somebody mentioned mushrooms, but again, all sorts of vegetables can be chopped in, just keeping in mind the texture. So if they're softer vegetables like summer squash or mushrooms that have a lot of liquid, those would go towards the end because we don't want those to burn. If they're harder ingredients like sweet potato could be a really tasty one to add, you would put that in with the broccoli and kind of those starchier, heavier vegetables. So similar to the salad, this is a great example of a really vegetable-filled meal. Vegetables are important because all of the different colors give you different phytonutrients, so we're getting a lot of different trace minerals and nutrients out of all of these different ingredients. I also want to bring attention to the My Plate healthy eating plate. This is a study done from Harvard. This replaces, if anyone remembers, our triangle, which made no sense because you very rarely encounter triangles, but this is a healthy eating plate, and it just shows you your plate should be at least half fruits and vegetables, a little more vegetables than fruit. And again, if we have our grains, rice works there. If we have our protein, some chicken, some tofu, some cashews, that's again a smaller portion. So keeping that in mind, I just try to incorporate as many vegetables as possible into any dishes I'm making, knowing that I get a nice base. I don't have to worry about different types or how many vegetables I'm eating. As many as possible, as often as possible is my theory. And for New Year's resolutions every year, it's eat vegetables at every meal, which is very hard to do sometimes, but always a good goal, and drink more water. So if there's anything you can try to remind yourself to do, it's stay on top of your water intake and just find different vegetables or ways to incorporate. A lot of people like Brussels sprouts. Again, you could shave that down and you could use Brussels sprouts instead of cabbage and play with that. Or I think a Brussels sprout teriyaki sweet potato would also be really tasty. If this was more of a winter meal we were having right now, maybe cutting up a butternut squash or some of the winter squashes. A curry squash is a Japanese variety that's really sweet. That would be delicious in here. So again, whatever you like to eat, chop it up and throw it in and see if that's a successful stir fry. But that's kind of the beauty of stir fries, is just throw what you have in a pan, and with the right marinade and the right process of adding our ingredients, we'll have a nice cook on whatever we have.